My name is Ethan Carter. I was born and raised in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, a city built on steel and history, yet shadowed by its industrial past. My family, however, was anything but solid. My childhood memories are fragments of arguments, slammed doors, and the haunting silence that followed. My parents' relationship was a perpetual storm, and I was caught in the eye of it. My mother, Mary Ann, was a fiercely independent woman with an iron will and an even sharper tongue. She worked as a nurse, tirelessly putting in double shifts to keep us afloat. Yet, her dedication to her job often came at the cost of our emotional connection. She wasn't affectionate, nor did she have much patience for a child's endless questions. Her love was practical, expressed in hot meals and a roof over our heads, but rarely in words or touch. My father, Mark, was the opposite. He was a dreamer, full of grand plans that never quite materialized. He would regale me with stories of the next big idea, but those ideas always seemed to evaporate before they turned into anything tangible. When I was 5, one of those dreams took him away for good. A heated argument with my mother ended with him packing his things into a battered Chevy and driving off into the night. He left behind little more than a box of records, a few photos, and a child too young to understand abandonment. After he left, my mother's frustration found a new target: me. I wasn't rebellious or particularly troublesome, but I think I reminded her too much of my father. She would scold me for the smallest infractions, her words cutting deeper than she likely intended. "Stop daydreaming and do something useful," she'd snap, pulling me out of my quiet escapes into books and sketches. I longed for her approval, but it always seemed just out of reach. School wasn't much better. I was a scrawny kid with glasses too big for my face and a wardrobe that screamed thrift store. The other kids noticed, of course, and I became an easy target for teasing. They called me scrap metal, a cruel nod to my family's ties to the industrial scrap yard my uncle ran. While the taunts hurt, I found solace in the art room, where I could lose myself in sketching landscapes or intricate mechanical designs. The art teacher, Mrs. Hawthorne, was one of the few adults who saw something in me. "You have a gift, Ethan," she'd say, her kind smile a rare balm to my bruised ego. Despite the challenges, I excelled academically. If there was one thing I inherited from my parents, it was determination, my mother's grit, and my father's imagination. By high school, I had developed a knack for engineering, building model bridges and small robots for science fairs. The principal, Mr. Robbins, once joked that I was destined to design the next Golden Gate. His words stayed with me, fueling my dreams of leaving Pittsburgh for something bigger. But leaving wasn't easy. My mother's health began to decline during my junior year. She developed chronic migraines, which made her even more irritable and less tolerant of my growing independence. While my friends planned college visits and parties, I spent weekends driving her to doctor's appointments and managing the household chores. By then, I had learned not to expect gratitude. Her approval wasn't given freely, and my efforts to please her were met with either silence or criticism. One particularly harsh evening stands out in my memory. I had just been accepted to Carnegie Mellon University on a partial scholarship. I came home, grinning ear to ear, the acceptance letter clutched in my hands. "Mom, I did it! I got in!" I exclaimed, hoping for at least a flicker of pride. She glanced up from her magazine, her expression neutral. "That's nice, Ethan, but how are you planning to pay for it? I can't help you, you know." Her words hit me like a cold wave, extinguishing my excitement. I mumbled something about loans and work-study programs and retreated to my room. That night, I vowed to prove her wrong. I wouldn't just go to college. I'd excel. I'd build a life that couldn't be dismissed with a casual remark. In the fall of 1999, I left for Carnegie Mellon with a mix of relief and trepidation. My dorm room became my sanctuary, a place where I could finally breathe. I threw myself into my studies, majoring in mechanical engineering. The rigorous coursework was both a challenge and a distraction from the lingering pain of my upbringing. I made friends, though cautiously, still wary of letting people get too close. It was during my sophomore year that I met her. Jenna Reynolds. She was a theater major, full of charisma and creativity. She had a way of drawing people in, her laughter as contagious as it was genuine. She noticed me sketching in the student lounge one evening and struck up a conversation. For someone who had spent much of his life in the shadows, her attention was intoxicating. Before I knew it, we were spending hours together, talking about everything from art to life goals. Jenna came from a different world. Her family was close-knit and supportive, the kind of family I had always envied. Yet, she never made me feel lesser for my fractured past. Instead, she encouraged me to embrace my strengths and confront my fears. "You're brilliant, Ethan," she once said, her voice steady. "But you gotta stop hiding. Let the world see who you really are." Her words were the catalyst for a change I didn't know I needed. With Jenna by my side, I started to open up, to trust again. We began dating officially during our junior year, and for the first time I felt a sense of belonging. But as life often does, it had other plans. Little did I know, the love we shared would soon face challenges neither of us could have predicted. Life with Jenna was transformative, almost as if she were the missing piece to a puzzle I'd been trying to solve my whole life. Her energy and optimism were infectious, and she had an uncanny ability to see the best in people, even in someone as guarded as me. For the first time, I began to imagine a future not dictated by my past but shaped by possibilities. Jenna and I moved in together during our final year at Carnegie Mellon. It was a small apartment off campus, with creaky floors and a perpetually dripping faucet, but to us, it was a palace. We spent late nights studying in the dim glow of the kitchen light, sharing cheap takeout, and dreaming about the lives we'd build after graduation. She often joked about my meticulous nature, how I could spend hours perfecting a design while she scribbled her play scripts on crumpled napkins. "You're a perfectionist, Ethan," she'd say with a grin, brushing back her dark curls. "But that's why you're going to make it big. Just don't forget the little people when you're designing spaceships or whatever." I'd laugh and shake my head. "You're the star, Jenna. Someday, everyone's going to know your name." As graduation approached, reality crept in. I secured a job with an engineering firm in Chicago, a promising opportunity that promised stability and growth. Jenna, on the other hand, faced a tougher road. Theater was a competitive field, and the idea of leaving her dreams behind to follow me to Chicago weighed heavily on her. We had countless conversations about it, sitting cross-legged on our thrift store couch. "I don't want to hold you back," she said one night, her voice trembling. "But I'm scared, Ethan. What if I never make it? What if I regret leaving?" Her vulnerability shook me. I wanted to promise her the world, to tell her that everything would work out, but I couldn't ignore the tension building between us. Love wasn't always enough, and the weight of compromise loomed over our every decision. In the end, Jenna decided to come with me to Chicago. "I'll find my way," she declared, her determination shining through the uncertainty. And for a while, it felt like we could weather anything. Our first year in Chicago was a whirlwind. I threw myself into my work, quickly earning the respect of my colleagues with my innovative designs. Jenna found a job as a barista while auditioning for local theater productions. It wasn't the glamorous start she'd envisioned, but she tackled it with the same grit and grace that had drawn me to her in the first place. Despite our busy schedules, we made time for each other. We explored the city's bustling streets, shared quiet evenings in our apartment, and leaned on each other when the weight of the world felt too heavy. But cracks began to form beneath the surface. Jenna's auditions often ended in rejection, and I could see the toll it was taking on her. She grew quieter, more withdrawn, her once bright spirit dimmed by disappointment. I tried to be there for her, offering encouragement and support, but my own stress at work sometimes made me impatient. "You're going to make it," I'd say, wrapping my arms around her as she stared blankly at her latest rejection letter. "Maybe," she'd reply, her voice barely above a whisper. "Or maybe I'm just chasing a dream that isn't meant to be." As months turned into years, the distance between us grew. My career flourished, earning promotions and accolades, but Jenna struggled to find her footing. The imbalance in our lives became a source of tension, and arguments that started over small things often spiraled into deeper issues. "I feel like I'm losing myself," she admitted one night after an especially heated fight. "You have everything you've ever wanted, Ethan, and I'm just here." Her words stung, not because they were unfair, but because they were true. I'd been so focused on building my career that I hadn't noticed how much she was sacrificing. The weight of my success felt heavier, knowing it came at the expense of her dreams. In an attempt to make things right, I encouraged Jenna to take a leap of faith. "What if you start your own theater company?" I suggested, eager to reignite her passion. She hesitated, then nodded. Maybe. Maybe that's what I need." Over the next year, Jenna poured herself into her new project. She gathered a small but dedicated group of actors and began producing plays in a rented space downtown. Watching her come alive again was a relief, but it also highlighted how far apart we'd drifted. Our once shared dreams had splintered into separate paths, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were holding on to something that no longer fit. The final straw came during a company gala I'd invited Jenna to attend. It was supposed to be a celebration of my latest promotion, but Jenna's absence cast a shadow over the evening. She had a performance that night, and while I understood, I couldn't help feeling the sting of her priorities shifting away from me. When I returned home late that night, she was waiting for me. "How was it?" she asked, her tone cautious. "Fine," I replied, shrugging off my jacket. "Would have been better if you were there." Her face fell, and the silence that followed was suffocating. "I'm sorry, Ethan," she finally said. "But this is my life now. I can't keep pretending that I'm just here to support you. I need to do this for me." "I never asked you to give up your dreams," I shot back, my frustration bubbling over. "But it feels like you've forgotten about us in the process." She looked at me with a mix of sadness and resolve. "Maybe that's the problem. We're both chasing something, but it's not the same thing anymore." That night, Jenna packed a bag and left. She moved into the apartment above the theater, determined to build a life on her own terms. As I sat alone in the quiet of our once shared home, I realized that love, no matter how deep, couldn't always bridge the gap between two people growing in opposite directions. The days after Jenna left were a blur. The apartment we had shared felt cavernous and eerily silent, filled only with echoes of her laughter and the faint traces of her presence. A coffee mug left on the counter, a scarf draped over the back of a chair. I told myself I'd be fine, that the separation was necessary for both of us to find our way. But the truth was, I felt like a part of me had been hollowed out. Work became my refuge. My colleagues joked about my relentless dedication, but they didn't know the real reason I stayed late every night. It was easier to immerse myself in equations and blueprints than to face the void waiting for me at home. I threw myself into projects with a singular focus, quickly earning recognition for my contributions. Promotions came, along with bigger responsibilities, but they brought little solace. Occasionally, I'd hear about Jenna through mutual friends. Her theater company was gaining traction, and she was producing plays that received glowing reviews in local publications. "She's really doing it," one friend remarked at a dinner party. "She's living her dream." I nodded, forcing a smile, but inside, the news stirred a complicated mix of pride and pain. I wanted her to succeed. Of course I did. But her success underscored the stark contrast between our lives. While she seemed to be thriving, I was simply existing, going through the motions of a life that felt increasingly empty. One particularly cold night in January, I stumbled across one of her plays by accident. I had taken a different route home and noticed a small crowd gathered outside a modest theater, their faces lit by a marquee that bore Jenna's name. Curious, I parked my car and walked closer, my breath visible in the frosty air. Through the glass doors, I caught a glimpse of her on stage, her silhouette illuminated by warm, golden light. She was directing, her movements animated as she guided the actors through a scene. For a moment, I felt an overwhelming urge to go inside, to tell her how proud I was, to ask if there was still room for us in the life she was building. But I hesitated, my feet rooted to the ground. What would I say? What could I say that wouldn't feel like an intrusion? Instead, I turned and walked away, the sound of applause following me into the night. Weeks turned into months, and I began to accept that our paths had truly diverged. I focused on building a life that felt more like mine, exploring interests I had neglected for years. I joined a hiking group, discovering a love for the outdoors that took me far from the steel and glass of the city. On weekends, I volunteered at a community center teaching kids the basics of engineering and robotics. Their wide-eyed curiosity reminded me of why I had fallen in love with creating in the first place. But despite these efforts, there were still moments when the weight of loneliness pressed down on me. One evening, as I sorted through old photos, I came across one of Jenna and me at Millennium Park. We were sitting by the famous bean sculpture, her head resting on my shoulder, both of us grinning like kids. I traced the edges of the photo, my chest tightening. "You've got to let go, Ethan," I whispered to myself, though the words felt hollow. Life has a way of moving forward, whether we're ready or not. And so, I pushed on, taking solace in small victories and fleeting joys. I reconnected with old friends, made new ones, and even attempted to date again. But each time, I found myself comparing these new connections to what I had with Jenna. It was an unfair comparison, one that left me more guarded than ever. Then one day, everything changed. I was in the middle of a client presentation at work when my phone buzzed incessantly in my pocket. Ignoring it, I finished the meeting and stepped into the hallway, only to find multiple missed calls from a number I didn't recognize. My stomach knotted as I listened to the voicemail. "Hi, Ethan. This is Jenna's sister, Claire. I know it's been a while, but I really need to talk to you. It's about Jenna. Please call me back as soon as you can." Her voice was tight, laced with urgency, and my heart raced as I dialed her number. Claire picked up on the first ring. "Ethan," she said, her words spilling out in a rush. "Jenna's in the hospital. There was an accident during one of her productions. A stage light fell, and it's bad. She's asking for you." I froze, the world around me dissolving into static. Jenna was hurt, and she wanted to see me? "I'll be there," I managed to say, my voice shaky. The drive to the hospital was a blur. I barely registered the streets or the traffic lights, my mind consumed with worry. When I arrived, Claire met me in the waiting room, her face pale and drawn. "She's stable," she said, leading me to Jenna's room, "but she's going to need a lot of time to recover." When I stepped inside, I saw Jenna lying in the hospital bed, her face bruised and her arm in a sling. Her eyes fluttered open, and when they met mine, a small, tired smile spread across her lips. "Ethan," she murmured. I approached her bedside, my throat tight. "Hey," I said softly, taking her hand in mine. "You're going to be okay." She squeezed my hand weakly, her gaze searching mine. "I didn't know who else to call," she admitted. I needed to see you." In that moment, the distance and the pain between us melted away. All that mattered was that she was here, and I was here, and maybe, just maybe, there was a way to rebuild what we had lost. Jenna's recovery became my singular focus in the weeks following her accident. Her injuries, though not life-threatening, were severe enough to leave her temporarily immobile. She had sustained a broken arm, several cracked ribs, and a concussion that left her with frequent dizziness and headaches. The vibrant, energetic woman I once knew now moved carefully, her body fragile and her spirit visibly shaken. Her sister, Claire, stayed by her side in the hospital during the first few days, but as her obligations piled up, I found myself stepping in more often. At first, I wasn't sure if Jenna wanted me there. After all, we had spent so much time apart. But every time I walked into her room, she greeted me with a faint smile that told me everything I needed to know. "Thank you for coming," she said one evening, her voice softer than I remembered. "I don't think I could do this alone." "You're not alone," I replied firmly, sitting beside her bed. "I'll be here as long as you need me." When Jenna was discharged, I helped her settle into her apartment above the theater. It was a modest space, cluttered with scripts and props, but it had her warmth stamped all over it. I cleared a corner of the room and set up a small table for her medications and water, making sure everything was within easy reach. "You don't have to do all this," she said one afternoon as I adjusted the pillows on her couch. "I want to," I replied, meeting her gaze. "You do the same for me." Jenna didn't argue, but her expression held a mix of gratitude and guilt. I could tell she wasn't used to needing help. Independence had always been her armor, and now that it had been stripped away, she struggled to reconcile her vulnerability with her pride. Over the next few weeks, I became a fixture in her life again. I drove her to doctor's appointments, ran errands, and even helped with light tasks for the theater. The familiarity of being with her felt both comforting and strange, like slipping into an old, well-worn jacket. But beneath the surface, there were unspoken questions lingering between us, questions neither of us was ready to confront. One night, as I was tidying up her kitchen, Jenna spoke up. "Why are you really doing this, Ethan?" she asked, her voice tentative. "Is it guilt? Obligation? Or something else?" I turned to face her, my hands gripping the edge of the counter. "It's not guilt, Jenna," I said after a moment. "And it's not obligation. I care about you. I always have." Her eyes softened, but there was a flicker of hesitation. "Even after everything that happened? After the way we drifted apart?" "Yes," I said simply. "Even after that." We sat in silence for a long time, the weight of the past pressing down on us. Finally, Jenna spoke. "I never stopped caring about you either," she admitted. "But I'm scared, Ethan. What if we try again and it doesn't work? What if we end up hurting each other all over again?" Her words mirrored my own fears, but I also knew that life rarely offered guarantees. "We won't know unless we try," I said. "And I think we owe it to ourselves to try." Over the following months, Jenna's health improved steadily. Her physical therapist marveled at her determination, and by early spring, she was able to move around without assistance. I continued to be a constant presence in her life, but I also made a point of giving her space to rediscover her independence. Our renewed connection wasn't without its challenges. Old habits and wounds resurfaced at times, and we occasionally found ourselves slipping into the same arguments that had driven us apart before. But we also learned to communicate more openly, to acknowledge our flaws without letting them define us. Jenna's theater company became a shared focus, a project that brought us closer together. She trusted me to help with set designs and technical aspects, while she poured her heart into directing and writing. Watching her thrive in her element was a reminder of why I had fallen in love with her in the first place. One evening, after a particularly successful performance, Jenna and I sat together in the dimly lit theater, the applause of the audience still echoing faintly in the air. She leaned her head on my shoulder, her voice soft. "I couldn't have done this without you." I smiled, wrapping an arm around her. "You could have," I said, "but I'm glad you didn't have to." The road ahead still felt uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. Jenna and I weren't the same people we had been before, and maybe that was a good thing. We had both grown, endured, and learned what truly mattered. As we left the theater that night, hand in hand, I realized that rebuilding wasn't about recreating the past. It was about forging something new, something stronger, built on the foundation of everything we had been through. Spring in Chicago brought a renewed sense of life to the city, and it mirrored the slow but steady rebuilding of my relationship with Jenna. The theater company was thriving, thanks to her vision and the dedication of the team she'd cultivated. For the first time, I saw her fully in her element, commanding respect and admiration from everyone she worked with. It was impossible not to feel proud of her. As for me, I had found a way to balance my demanding job with the time I spent at the theater. My colleagues, who had grown accustomed to my late nights and all-consuming focus, were surprised by the shift. "You seem different," one of them remarked during a team meeting. "Happier." They weren't wrong. The changes in my life felt like the pieces of a puzzle finally coming together. Jenna and I still had our differences, but we faced them with an honesty and patience that hadn't existed before. We weren't trying to fit into an idealized version of love. Instead, we embraced the messiness and imperfections that made us who we were. One weekend in late May, Jenna suggested taking a break from the city. "We need to get away for a bit," she said, her eyes bright with excitement. "Somewhere quiet, where we can just breathe." I agreed, and we rented a small cabin on the shores of Lake Michigan. The drive there was filled with easy conversation and laughter, a stark contrast to the tension that had once defined our time together. The cabin was cozy, nestled among towering pines with a view of the lake that shimmered under the sunlight. We spent our days hiking, cooking simple meals, and sitting by the water, talking about everything and nothing. At night, we'd sit by the fire, wrapped in blankets, watching the flames dance in the dark. It was during one of these quiet evenings that Jenna surprised me. "I've been thinking a lot about us," she said, her voice steady but soft. I turned to face her, the flickering firelight casting shadows across her face. "What about us?" She hesitated, then took my hand in hers. "About what we've been through and where we're headed. I know we're still figuring things out, but I want you to know I'm all in. I don't want to be afraid anymore." Her words struck a chord deep within me. For so long, I had carried the fear of failing her again, of falling short of what she needed. But hearing her speak with such clarity and conviction filled me with a sense of calm. "I'm all in too," I replied, my voice firm. "No matter what happens, I'm not going anywhere." We sat there in silence for a while, the weight of the moment settling around us. In that cabin, far from the noise and chaos of our usual lives, we made a quiet promise to each other, a commitment to keep trying, to keep growing, and to keep choosing each other, no matter how difficult it might be. When we returned to Chicago, the rhythm of our lives picked up again, but the bond we had strengthened during our getaway remained. I found myself more present, both at work and at home, and Jenna seemed to radiate a newfound confidence. One evening, she invited me to join her at a gala for the arts community. It was a black tie event, filled with influential figures from Chicago's theater scene. Jenna looked stunning in an emerald green dress, her hair swept into an elegant updo. As we mingled with the crowd, I couldn't help but marvel at how far she had come. Watching her speak with passion and eloquence about her work reminded me of the woman I had fallen in love with all those years ago. Later that night, as we danced under the soft glow of the chandeliers, Jenna leaned in close. "Do you think we're ready?" she asked, her voice barely audible above the music. "Ready for what?" I replied, though I already had an inkling of what she meant. "To start thinking about the future," she said, her eyes searching mine. Together, the question hung in the air, laden with possibilities. For so long, our relationship had been about survival, weathering storms and patching up wounds. But now we stood on the cusp of something new, something that felt like the beginning of a life built not on what we had lost, but on what we had found in each other. "I think we are," I said, pulling her closer. From that moment, our focus shifted to building a shared future. We started small, discussing practical things like combining finances and redecorating her apartment to make it feel more like ours. But the conversations soon grew larger, touching on dreams of a home outside the city, of traveling together, and of what a life together might look like in the years to come. In the fall, Jenna proposed a bold new venture for her theater company, an expansion to include educational programs for underserved youth in the community. "I want to give kids the chance to tell their stories," she explained, her enthusiasm contagious. "Theater saved me, and I want to pass that on." I offered to help with the technical aspects, using my engineering skills to design a flexible, cost-effective stage setup for their new space. Working together on the project brought us even closer, blending our strengths in a way that felt seamless. By the time winter rolled around, the theater's expansion was well underway, and Jenna and I had settled into a rhythm that felt solid and secure. On Christmas Eve, as snow blanketed the city, we stood on the balcony of her apartment, watching the lights twinkle below. Jenna turned to me, her cheeks flushed from the cold. "Do you think we finally got it right this time?" she asked, a hint of playful skepticism in her tone. I smiled, wrapping my arms around her. "I think we've been getting it right for a while now. It just took us some time to figure it out." She laughed, the sound warm and full of life. "Here's to the next chapter," she said, raising an imaginary toast. "To the next chapter," I echoed, knowing that whatever lay ahead, we'd face it together. The next chapter of our lives unfolded slowly, with moments of joy, challenges, and unexpected growth. Jenna's theater expansion was a resounding success, drawing praise from the community and local press alike. The youth program she'd envisioned took off, transforming the lives of young people who had never before been given a platform to express themselves. I often marveled at her ability to inspire others, her passion igniting sparks of hope wherever she went. As for me, I found a new balance between my career and personal life. The demanding hours of my engineering job no longer felt suffocating as I learned to set boundaries and prioritize what truly mattered. I even started mentoring younger engineers, finding fulfillment in guiding them the way others had guided me. Jenna and I began discussing long-term plans, including the possibility of buying a house. I've always wanted a little place with a garden, she mused one evening as we flipped through real estate listings. Somewhere quiet but close enough to the city that we can still feel connected. Her vision resonated with me, and we started searching in earnest. After months of looking, we found it, a charming two-story home in a suburb just outside Chicago. It had a wraparound porch, a small backyard perfect for gardening, and a spare room that Jenna immediately claimed as her writing studio. Moving in felt like a new beginning. We spent weekends painting walls, assembling furniture, and transforming the house into a home that reflected both of us. The process wasn't without its hiccups. Jenna's penchant for bold, vibrant colors clashed with my preference for neutrals, but we found compromises that made us both happy. One sunny Saturday in spring, we hosted a housewarming party for our friends and family. The yard buzzed with laughter and conversation, the smell of grilled food wafting through the air. As I watched Jenna move through the crowd, her smile bright and her laughter infectious, I felt a deep sense of contentment. "This is good, isn't it?" she said later that evening, as we sat together on the porch, the party winding down around us. "It's better than good," I replied, squeezing her hand. Life, however, had a way of testing even the strongest foundations. That summer, Jenna's mother fell seriously ill, and Jenna spent weeks traveling back and forth between Chicago and her parents' home in Michigan. The strain of juggling her work, family obligations, and our relationship began to take its toll. There were nights when she came home exhausted, her spirit dimmed by the weight of responsibility. "I don't know if I can do this," she admitted one evening, tears streaming down her face. "You don't have to do it alone," I said, pulling her close. "We'll get through this together." Supporting Jenna during this time became my priority. I took over more responsibilities at home, ensuring she had one less thing to worry about. I even accompanied her on some of her trips to Michigan, spending time with her family and helping wherever I could. It wasn't easy, but it brought us closer in ways I hadn't anticipated. As the months passed, Jenna's mother's health stabilized, allowing Jenna to focus on her theater again. The experience, though painful, strengthened her resolve to cherish the moments we had. "Life is too short to hold back," she said one night, her gaze fixed on the stars above. Inspired by her words, we began to dream bigger. We talked about traveling the world, exploring places we'd only ever read about. We planned trips to Italy, Japan, and South Africa, and though it would take years to visit them all, the excitement of planning gave us something to look forward to. One winter evening, as we decorated our first Christmas tree in the new house, Jenna paused, a thoughtful expression crossing her face. "What is it?" I asked, placing an ornament on a branch. She turned to me, her eyes shimmering. "Do you ever think about starting a family?" The question caught me off guard, but not in a bad way. It was something we had danced around before, never fully committing to the idea, but never dismissing it either. Sometimes, I admitted, meeting her gaze. "Do you?" She nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips. "I think I'm ready. Not right this second, but soon." The conversation opened a new chapter for us, one filled with anticipation and possibility. Over the next year, we prepared ourselves emotionally and financially for the journey ahead. Jenna's theater continued to thrive, and I found stability in my career, giving us the foundation we needed to grow our family. By the following spring, we received the news we had been hoping for. Jenna was pregnant. The months that followed were a whirlwind of excitement, preparation, and a fair share of nerves. We turned the spare room into a nursery, complete with a rocking chair and walls painted in a soft shade of yellow. When our daughter, Lily, was born, everything changed. Holding her for the first time, her tiny hand wrapped around my finger, I felt a kind of love I hadn't known was possible. Jenna, too, seemed transformed, her joy radiating as she cradled our baby girl. Parenthood brought its own set of challenges, but it also deepened our bond. We learned to navigate sleepless nights, endless diaper changes, and the unrelenting demands of raising a child. Through it all, we leaned on each other, finding strength in the partnership we had built. As Lily grew, so did our family's happiness. Our home became a place of laughter, creativity, and love, a far cry from the fractured beginnings we had both come from. Jenna's theater continued to flourish, and I found new purpose in mentoring young engineers, eager to pass on the lessons I had learned. One evening, as we sat together on the porch, Lily playing in the yard, Jenna turned to me with a smile. "Do you ever think about how far we've come?" "All the time," I replied, my heart full. The journey we had taken wasn't easy, but it was ours. And as I watched our daughter chase fireflies under the fading light of the sun, I knew that every step had been worth it. Years passed, and our lives evolved in ways we never could have imagined. Lily grew into a curious, spirited child with Jenna's creativity and my love of problem solving. Her laughter filled our home, and her endless questions kept us on our toes. Watching her discover the world was a joy that made every sacrifice and challenge worthwhile. Jenna's theater company reached new heights, becoming a cornerstone of the Chicago art scene. The youth program she had launched expanded into a citywide initiative, touching the lives of hundreds of children. I often attended her productions with Lily, who loved sitting in the front row and marveling at the magic her mom created on stage. As for me, I found fulfillment in my work mentoring the next generation of engineers. My career had plateaued in the best possible way. I no longer chased promotions or accolades, but focused instead on projects that aligned with my values. Balancing work and family life became second nature, and I reveled in the stability we had built together. But life, as it always does, found ways to remind us of its unpredictability. One crisp autumn afternoon, Jenna and I sat on a park bench, watching Lily play with a group of friends. Jenna leaned against me, her head resting on my shoulder. "I've been thinking," she began, her voice soft. "About what?" I asked, wrapping an arm around her. "About what comes next," she said, her gaze fixed on the vibrant leaves swirling in the breeze. "Lily's growing up so fast, and the theater's in a good place. I feel like it's time for something new." Her words caught me off guard. Jenna had poured so much of herself into the theater that it was hard to imagine her stepping away. "Do you mean leaving the theater?" I asked cautiously. She nodded. "Not entirely, but I think I need to scale back. I want to spend more time with you and Lily, and maybe try something different. I've been thinking about writing a book, something about my journey, about the kids we've worked with. It feels like the right time." I looked at her, admiration swelling in my chest. Jenna had always been fearless in pursuing her dreams, and this new chapter felt like a natural extension of her passion. "You'd be amazing at that," I said, kissing her forehead. The decision marked a turning point for our family. Jenna transitioned out of her day-to-day responsibilities at the theater, passing the torch to a trusted colleague. In the months that followed, she dedicated herself to writing, filling our home with stacks of notebooks and drafts. I loved seeing her pour herself into her new project, her excitement contagious. As Jenna embraced her new role, I found myself reflecting on my own path. For years, I had been content with my career, but watching Jenna take a leap inspired me to consider my own next steps. After much thought, I decided to launch a small consulting firm, focusing on sustainable engineering solutions. It was a risk, but Jenna's unwavering support gave me the confidence to move forward. Our lives settled into a rhythm that felt both new and familiar. Lily thrived in school, excelling in math and science while dabbling in the arts. She reminded me so much of Jenna, her boundless energy and curiosity, a constant source of wonder. One evening, as we sat around the dinner table, Lily surprised us with a question. "What made you and Mom fall in love?" she asked, her eyes wide with curiosity. Jenna and I exchanged a glance, a smile passing between us. "It's a long story," Jenna said, laughing softly. "But the short version is that your dad and I found each other when we needed it most. We've been helping each other ever since. And we've learned a lot along the way," I added, ruffling Lily's hair. "Like what?" she pressed, her curiosity undeterred. I paused, considering my words. Like how important it is to listen, to forgive, and to keep choosing each other every day. Love isn't always easy, but it's always worth it. Lily nodded thoughtfully, as if filing the advice away for future use. As the years continued to pass, our family weathered its share of challenges. Health scares, career setbacks, and the inevitable struggles of parenting a teenager. But through it all, Jenna and I remained steadfast in our commitment to each other and to the life we had built together. On our 20th wedding anniversary, we returned to the cabin by Lake Michigan where we had made our promise to rebuild so many years ago. The same towering pines stood sentinel over the quiet lake, and the air was filled with the soft rustle of leaves. Sitting by the fire that evening, Jenna reached for my hand. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" she said, her voice tinged with emotion. "We have," I replied, squeezing her hand. And I wouldn't change a thing. Looking back, it was clear that our journey had been far from perfect. We had stumbled, fallen, and faced moments of doubt that could have broken us. But each challenge had strengthened our bond, reminding us of the love that had carried us through. As we watched the flames flicker in the darkness, I felt a deep sense of gratitude for Jenna, for Lily, and for the life we had created together. It wasn't the life I had imagined growing up, but it was everything I could have hoped for. The next morning, as the sun rose over the lake, Jenna and I sat on the porch, our hands entwined. The future stretched out before us, uncertain but full of promise. "Here's to the next chapter," Jenna said, raising her coffee mug in a toast. "To the next chapter," I echoed, knowing that whatever it held, we would face it together. The years continued their steady march forward, carrying with them the ebbs and flows of a life well lived. Lily graduated from high school and went off to college, choosing to pursue a degree in engineering, a decision that brought me no small amount of pride. Jenna teased me, saying she's definitely her father's daughter, though Lily's passion for theater reminded us both of her mother's influence. With an empty nest, Jenna and I found ourselves in a quieter phase of life. The house, once filled with the chaos of a growing family, now echoed with a serene stillness. We took advantage of the newfound freedom, traveling to the places we had always dreamed of visiting. Strolling through the cobblestone streets of Florence, marveling at the cherry blossoms in Kyoto, and standing beneath the endless sky of the African savanna. All of it felt like a testament to the partnership we had forged. But life has a way of reminding us of its fragility. One brisk autumn morning, during a routine doctor's visit, Jenna was given news that shook the foundation of our world. The diagnosis was breast cancer. It was caught early, the doctors reassured us, and her prognosis was optimistic. But the road ahead would be difficult, filled with treatments and uncertainty. True to her nature, Jenna faced the challenge with courage and grace. "We've been through worse," she said with a determined smile, her hand resting on mine. "This won't break us." It didn't. The months that followed tested us in ways we hadn't imagined. Chemotherapy left Jenna weak, her vibrant energy dimmed by the weight of the fight. I became her caregiver, managing her appointments, preparing her meals, and sitting with her during the long hours of treatment. There were moments when the fear felt overwhelming, but we clung to each other, drawing strength from the bond we had spent decades building. Lily returned home during Jenna's treatment, balancing her studies with helping out at home. Seeing the way she cared for her mother, her determination to be there for us, was a source of immense comfort. "You've raised an incredible daughter," Jenna said one evening, her voice soft but steady. "We did," I corrected,